I'm so sick of people disrespecting the Jacksonville Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence. I'm going to tell you why it happens and what we all can do about it here in Jacksonville in just a second.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right. It is your team every day here on Locked On Jaguars, where we thank you for making us your first listen. I am Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast that you can also find on the Locked On Jaguars YouTube page. Just head on over. Make sure you subscribe. Please hit the like button. Also hit the bell so you receive notifications each and every time we drop an episode. And wherever you listen to audio podcasts, please go to that location every single day. We will be there. Make sure that you tap in so you don't miss an episode. An episode like today's episode, which is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Shout out to the everydayers who listen to us every single day, and you can be an everydayer. All you got to do is listen to us every single day. We're talking disrespect. And yeah, I'm calling it disrespect because it's not just a matter of opinion, in my opinion. Why so many people are down on the Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence. And I'm going to tell you, this is about Greg Cosell and some of the things that he had to say about Trevor Lawrence being a game manager. You can go Google that and find it. I'm not going to belabor too much repeating what Greg said. And I'm also not going to just totally put this on the Greg Cosell interviews or podcast appearances that I've seen, because I have so much respect for him. So I want you to know that I've always liked him. And I'm not one of those people that just because you say one thing that I disagree with, that means that we got some kind of beef. And he doesn't know me from anybody. So that's not what it is. But it's because I like Greg so much and because I respect his work so much that I found the fact that I disagreed with him so vehemently on this. That's why I'm doing the show, because it's like, okay, if somebody I really, really like is saying it, as opposed to people that kind of always say things that can be viewed as either incendiary or just gaslighting just for ratings. I don't think Greg is that type of person. So I'm going to make sure that we make that extremely clear. I'm going to tell you where we're going. By segment 3, I'm going to tell you why that disrespect won't disappear unless the Jaguars make it disappear and do something about it. And so that's one focus, right? I'm going to explain why it's hot take BS most of the time. And the reason why I call it what I call it, whether I call it egregious or whether I call it lazy, which is a real word I think is being overused a lot these days. But more or less, I think it's just a bunch of BS, and I'm going to explain it to you. And part of that is our industry, right? And it's not just the people that get paid to do it. It's folks that don't get paid to do it. People that just talk banter about sports. And I kind of mentioned this the other day, where they don't really take a hard look. And if you want to take this and make this a microcosm of society and other things, you can do that. But that's not what we're going to do here. We're going to keep this about sports. And I think that's the focus that a lot of people need to do. But first, we're going to start out with crossing the line on Trevor Lawrence, which inevitably means that you cross the line on the hopes of the Jacksonville Jaguars. That is, a lot of that is going on. In my opinion, it's not necessarily fact-based, even though we can make the facts and we can make the stats and we can make things actually say what we want them to say. We can also both be watching the same thing, not necessarily Greg Cosell and I, but just two different people. Two different people can watch the same thing, and because of their perspective on sports or life, but we're going to keep it at sports again, they can actually see two different things. I had a discussion this morning, if you want to call it a discussion, an exchange with a fan on social media. I pointed out a Luka Doncic tape where somebody posted a Luka Doncic defensive efforts on certain clips, and he didn't play any defense. So I made a comment that he needed to get better at that part of his game if we're going to compare him to the greats and if Dallas is ever going to elevate, because in my opinion, Luka's defense is not just something that isn't a strength, it is an absolute weakness for the Dallas Mavericks, right? Well, the person shot back at me and said whatever, and called me lazy, said my take was lazy. Here's what people don't understand. I'm not using that as a cherry picking item to talk about that. That's the way I feel and have felt for 3 years watching Luka Doncic. So not everything that someone says is based on a cherry picking highlight clip or is based on the post that they're talking about. That's why I'm saying with the Greg Cosell, Greg is a tape watcher and somebody that I respect as a tape watcher, and he's come to this conclusion about Trevor Lawrence. So I'm not saying that the things that Greg saw and other people like him, some of the things that they see aren't true. I myself have been critical of Trevor Lawrence. I have. I've been extremely critical of Trevor Lawrence in a lot of ways that would make people think that I'm some sort of hater. I got killed by people telling me that he doesn't have a turnover problem. He's led the league in turnover since he got here. That's a turnover problem. I don't care whether it's interceptions. I don't care whether it's fumbles. It's somehow it equates to being careless with the football. His rookie year, he made throws that he shouldn't make. Even now, he tries throws that they scratch my head sometimes. That doesn't mean that he doesn't do a lot of things well. It doesn't mean that he's doing some of those things because of all of the things around him not being lined up the way they're supposed to be. It doesn't mean that the kid can't actually get better and grow in the mistakes that he's making are mistakes that won't change or won't ever improve. It also doesn't mean that Trevor Lawrence needs to be relegated to a dude that you give up on and just make him a backup. Now we're going to start getting to the point where we're going to see where that oil and water start to fluctuate. And here's why it fluctuates a lot. Because there's just this rush to find the next Patrick Mahomes or the next Joe Burrow, and maybe not even including him. But there's this rush to find the next Mahomes or the next Brady because there's this idea that if one is out there and you don't have one yourself, you'll never be able to beat him. And that's the point. Couldn't be further from the truth. As great as Tom Brady was at winning 7 championships, he played 13 other years where he didn't win one. As great as, say, Aaron Rodgers has been for the last 16 years or whatever, however long he's played, however many years he started, he has one championship. You don't have to be Tom Brady. You can be Ben Roethlisberger and have 2 titles. Yeah, you can be Peyton Manning and have 2 titles. Sure you can. Everything is being measured by someone being up here. Now, we'll do it in all sports. And my Luka comparison was those people that are saying that Luka is one of the great. They say he's better than Larry Bird. And this is where I tell you that we have criticism of him that we did not have of Larry Bird. And I watched them both. All right. When you start comparing people to other top 5, top 10-ish type players, then all of the other stuff goes out of the window. And that's why you start nitpicking at their greatness. But nobody's comparing Trevor Lawrence yet to all of those people, or they shouldn't be, but they are. They're looking at, and I understand it because Patrick Mahomes is in the league and you got to beat him, right? And the Jaguars actually lost the playoff game while Trevor and Patrick were going head to head and Patrick was banged up. And those are the moments that later on, or at some point, Trevor Lawrence is going to have to take advantage of. But for those people that think that that moment has passed and gone, they're crazy. What I'm going to get into in segment 2 is this is not about disagreement of whether or not Trevor Lawrence has lived up to anything, because I did a show just last week and I said, no, he has not lived up to the hype. But it is time for them to give him a contract extension. Now, some people would consider that opposites or an oxymoron. How could you say that and say the other thing? Because 2 things can actually be true at the same time. And that's what we're going to discuss in segment 2 and why these BS hot takes exist when they're talking about these prospects and how much of a challenge that is. And it shouldn't be a challenge at all for people who actually do this job for a living. And I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about the personnel department. Why what they do is not what we do, and why what we do is so easy to do compared to what they are inevitably charged with having to do. I'll try to break that down for you and set your mind free so you can handle all of this stuff that's going to keep happening until it doesn't. In segment 3, I'm going to tell you what you actually, when it doesn't, when do we get to that threshold? So I'll get to all of that in just a second here. as we continue talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence being disrespected. We'll keep going in segment 2 here on Locked On Jaguars in just a second. First, I got to tell you about the Gametime app, man. If you're out here thinking about buying tickets, whether it's the football games, if you want to try to go to the NBA Finals, and there's a big fight coming up this weekend, a whole bunch of stuff going on. Baseball is in full swing, and if you need tickets, but you don't know when you're going to get off or when that paycheck is going to hit, and you may have to buy a last-minute ticket, there's no place better to do that than Gametime. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater tickets to all of those things. They even have flash deals and zone deals and all-in pricing. A lot of times you hear this phrase, your lack of planning is not an emergency on my part. That is nonsense when it comes to Gametime. Your lack of planning or your last-minute way of doing things fits fine with what they do, because they will find you a ticket at the right price, and all of that stuff you don't even have to worry about. So how about this? Something that is usually an inconvenience for other folks is actually right in the wheelhouse of Gametime. Take the guesswork out of it all and download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spelled LOCKEDONNFL, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, second segment here on Locked On Jaguars, talking about disrespect. I put the Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence all together, because when you disrespect Trevor, you're disrespecting the Jaguars, right? How about we start separating that a little bit? Some of the culpability of the things that you haven't seen from Trevor Lawrence that you were expected to see from Trevor, those are the faults of the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is where this all started. Rookie year guy has to learn a whole new system his second year. That's part of it. That's a huge part of it, right? That whole debacle with Urban Meyer and all of the things that were said on and off the field, and the fact that they just kept pushing this kid in front of the microphone, and I told him that was a mistake from the very beginning. He can't solve all of your problems with. Maybe we can learn something from this, right? You can't take one person and do them a disservice by putting them in a position they're not supposed to be in because of our own feelings, and then want to have them talk it out with everybody, especially when they're a rookie. You hear me? You hear me, folks? And you can take that to something else, and you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about, because you do people a disservice, because now his face had been out there all the time. He was constantly talking. He wasn't necessarily using all of his time to just be a rookie quarterback and ingratiate himself with the teammates. He was everything, man. He was the new hope, right? And we got to keep taking him, and it's going to raise the value of the Jaguars. Just keep placing him and plastering him all over the place, when the reality is the thing is going to raise the value of the team of the Jaguars, and to raise the play of the Jaguars is building a resourceful support system around Trevor Lawrence, insulating him with not only on the field talent, but off the field people that could handle certain situations so that he didn't have to do it. So now, instead of there being this empathetic and sympathetic feeling for Trevor, no, y'all rolled him out like he was Superman. I'm not talking about fans, because fans are going to do that, right? But when fans are doing that, ownership needs to temper that a little bit and pull it back. But sales, marketing, and those things made them do other things, which raised the expectations, which made a lot of people who were already maybe a little bit skeptical say they got something to hide, because they keep having them doing all of this other stuff, and it ain't got nothing to do with playing on the field. What the Jaguars should have done during all of that mess was have less Trevor talking. We'll hide him a little bit. And anyone that listened to this podcast when all of that was going on in 2020 knows that I have said this over and over and over again. Folks got Trevor fatigue, not Jacksonville folks, but outside of Jacksonville. They got fatigued because everything that he was being talked about or talking about had nothing to do with football. And all they wanted to do is highlight the mistakes of the team. And the guy that touches the ball the most is the quarterback. So they inevitably highlighted mistakes that he made. And he made some. But a lot of those mistakes that he made were rookie mistakes. A lot of them were made because of personnel. A lot of them were made because of a lack of offensive structure and cohesion amongst the coaches, and just a pure lack of talent with a bad roster. Year 2 started out a little bit the same, but you could kind of tell that the kid was trying very, very hard, and eventually things turned around and got right, and he made a run. Then they get to the playoffs, and you see the absolute, if there's a game that really, really describes or allows you to identify with the Trevor Lawrence quandary that we're dealing with, it was the playoff game against the Chargers, which subsequently had followed a poorly played game that they actually won against the Titans, where the defense carried them into the playoffs. Okay. He didn't play well that day either, and it was a national game to see who was going to go to the playoffs. Then it carried over, and he played poor in the first half and had 4 interceptions. All right, one was a tip ball, but the rest of them weren't. They were on him, and he wasn't playing well. And right before the half, he started turning it around, right? He scored a touchdown, and after he got that one touchdown, what he did after that was, in the second half, every time that they had to score, they did. And he was pinpoint, and he was accurate. He wasn't as good as the second half suggested. The second half suggested that the Chargers panicked. The second half also showed you what he was capable of when he was on. The first half showed you exactly what he was at that period and point in time, a guy who presses a lot early in games, who has a live arm, who has a tendency to overthrow the football, and that's what resulted in the first half. But notice not many people gave him credit for having the worst first half that you can imagine a quarterback having, and then having the mental fortitude to come out in the second half, despite what he had done, and do what he actually did in the second half. No one was giving credit for it. Everyone talked about how dumb the Chargers were and how lucky the Jags were. That's all people talked about. But when you're not local, you don't get the information that you're supposed to get to know that we kind of felt that he was capable of that. I recall vividly when they were down 27-7, I said, this game is not over. I was in the press box, and someone, I can't remember, I think I blocked them, but they were a long-time listener and a long-time follower of me on my social page. They told me I was crazy. I think the dude was drinking, because he told me, you need to start being accountable for the things that you say, right? So, okay, here's what I'm accountable for. The game wasn't over. You thought they were, and it wasn't, because I know from being around the team what that kid is made of on the inside. Now, what he's made up on the inside are just like stats. It doesn't tell the whole story. And that's not all he has to do. And that's not all he has to be. He has to take ownership. He has to get better. He has to improve. But because, I'm local, I think he has the capacity to do it. And this is not me, and y'all know me better than this. This is not me being a homer. I do not confuse my fandom with my ability to cover the team. And y'all know that, because I've been one of the most critical people of the Jacksonville Jaguars and how they've been moving for a long time. This is real. This is real. And I know that there are things around Trevor Lawrence that ain't right, or weren't right in the past. And I think that they've righted them a little bit and gotten them corrected now. Most of it was the attitude, and most of it was, everybody talks about culture. Most of it was the psyche, if you will, of an organization that had been in football purgatory for most of the last 25 years. That doesn't go away because of one person's presence. One person can influence it, but one person can't make it change. It is hard to get a football team on the same page. As much criticism as the Jaguars have had the last 2 years from from national people, you'd sit here and think that the Jaguars have won a total of 9 games. They've won 9 games each of the last 2 years. I think it's all hyperbole. I think it's all hot takes. I think it's easy to point at Trevor and say he isn't good. And then I think it's easy for people like Nick Wright, when Trevor does something right, to call him the prince that was and all of this stuff. I think the hyperbole, I think the hot takes, I think, trying to win the day with making outlandish statements on both sides is what have us in a quandary that makes Trevor Lawrence so polarizing. I'm going to tell you the truth that I feel about Trevor Lawrence, and you all know what it is. I think he deserves a contract extension that he's going to get here probably within the next week or so. And I also believe that there's a chance that he can change people's minds. How can that happen? They got to win. And some of the things that he's done in the past, he can't continue to do. And the thing that I always talk about is the variance between being great and not good. It has to shrink, and you got to be more good than you are not good. That's how the perception changes. You can do it with wins on the field. Have the Jags supported him enough to get that done? The answer seems to be yes so far. We have to wait, but I'll tell you why it won't disappear until it won't. But first, I have to let you know about Locked On Sports Today. If you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN and you're tired of all of the foolishness and yelling and screaming at each other, and people telling people what they should and shouldn't think, have to turn down the volume with all the shouting, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm going to tell you why it won't go away until it goes away, because the people are responsible. They got to make it go away. And what you can do until then, in the meantime, in between time. I'll tell you about all that here in the third and final segment, Locked On Jaguars. All right, third and final segment coming at you here, Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. Always thanking you for making us your first listen. Another reminder, enjoy this, man, because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and that's available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. If you're an everydayer, man, and you miss a show, you can always go to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, so what we're going to do is, let me just flat out tell you something. It's not going to go away. For anybody that thinks that folks who don't pay attention, who don't call local people to ask their expertise, that think that they can look from afar and tell exactly what's going on with Trevor Lawrence, that only want to look at stats. Some people look at highlights. Some people, when they look at highlights, they don't look at the game or the context. And even the greatest people that watch tape will tell you, if you don't know what you're looking at, and this is not a knock on anyone that does it, but if you don't know what you're looking at, that sometimes that analysis can be slanted. I had to make sure that I put that the correct way, because I don't want to make it sound like I'm smarter than somebody else. I am, however, going to tell you that if you cover a team locally, you might be smarter than someone who doesn't cover the team locally. And I think you know a little bit more about what's going on. You know who's banged up. You know if Trevor Lawrence was banged up. You know if there's one side of the line that does things all the time, so he has to roll. And you know why he's throwing that ball quickly, because you know what happened 2 weeks ago when you saw it. You understand that maybe he's trying to throw a ball where a certain guy that has a certain skill set has a better chance to catch the ball, because because you've seen in the past that dude can't catch that ball. If you know Jamal Agnew is streaking down the sideline, how did Trevor miss him? Well, if you've been around Jamal Agnew, you know he's about that tall. That's why Trevor missed him. And the throw has to be perfect, right? If you watch Trevor Lawrence, you say he never attacks the middle of the field. Well, I ask you, who's running routes in the middle of the field that he can throw the ball to? Has it been emphasized in coaching? Do they have a seam eater in the tight ends? Maybe that's why they went out and got Gabe Davis, who lives in the middle of the field, in the deep middle of the field, right? Maybe that's why they went and got a guy who's comfortable in that role, okay? Maybe now, because they have two, what they call big receivers, a real flanker and a real split end, with the rookie BTJ and Gabe Davis. Maybe now you get to see Christian Kirk play a role that he's actually supposed to be playing, right? Maybe now Evan Ingram might not get 100 balls caught, but he'll be a more effective football player instead of somebody who just caught 100 balls, but it didn't have an effect really on them actually getting better as a team, okay? Maybe better offensive line play. Maybe a stronger center. We'll give Trevor Lawrence a whole bunch more time and a whole bunch more confidence to stand in the pocket and step up and throws as opposed to checking stuff down and throwing the ball sideways. Maybe those deep balls that they say Trevor doesn't throw enough of, well, maybe he will now on first down because play action will work, because teams will actually respect the running game because ETN isn't getting hit from the interior as soon as he touches the ball at a rate that's faster than any other running back in the National Football League. Maybe Doug won't go for it and put all of that pressure on Trevor every time they cross the 50-yard line, because there won't be a real rush to score, because before the team was challenged to score points because of all of the things I just mentioned. So now the pressure to get points anytime you get close won't exist. Maybe the defense will play better in certain situations and won't get tired because the offense isn't going 3 and out and their lack of depth won't show up. All of these things are factors when you factor in how Trevor Lawrence has played, and then how that factors in to whether or not the Jacksonville Jaguars are the right organization for him to be in the first place. And all of this disrespect of the Jaguars might slow down a little bit if everyone just stop, pause, stop doing hot takes, stop going off of the fact that all of this hype and hyperbole existed of Trevor Lawrence. It's never as bad as y'all think, and it's probably never as good as the people who want it to be good. It's probably not that good either. At some point, it's probably somewhere right in the middle. And in the middle of that, if you ask Trevor Lawrence what he has to do, maybe you'd understand that he knows he has to improve. He knows there are things that he needs to do better. He's continuing to grow and get stronger as a quarterback. But what we're not going to do is sit here and act like that kid hasn't done anything that'll at least make you say, woo, because he has. Go watch his game last year head-to-head against C.J. Stroud, right at the point where everybody's bragging about C.J. Stroud. And C.J. Stroud played well. This is the game in Houston. This is after he outplayed Trevor early in the year. And tell me you didn't see a quarterback that deserves a contract extension. Tell me you didn't see a quarterback in the first half against the Cincinnati Bengals on Monday night that looked like a dude that could eventually lead his team to the playoffs. You probably say, yeah, but then those people would say, but. No, there's no but. There's no but. It's all of this stuff. It's all of the hype. It's all of the proving, like you got to prove your hot take. You got to say, you got to be absolute in your thought. Get him out of here. No, he's no good. The whole draft class, the kid that they picked, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, even Mac Jones, who's now Trevor's backup, the whole crew is, just pause a little bit. Just calm down. Say what you want to say, but this is the Jacksonville Jaguars fans. You ain't got to listen to all that and don't believe it. And I ain't trying to tell you not to listen to it and don't believe it because you're being emotional. You ain't got to listen to it and believe it because you got to trust yourself a little bit. Don't be trusting that fan part of you. Don't trust Mr. Optimistic. Trust the reality and the truth that no one knows yet whether or not Trevor Lawrence is ever going to win a Super Bowl. But I tell you what I do know. I do know that Trevor Lawrence is way better than being a backup on some team that's not even in the top 18 or 19 teams in the league. I know that Trevor Lawrence is on the upper side of the better quarterbacks in this league. It's 32 teams. He's in the top 16. And of the top 16, I would say he's closer to the middle of that or closer to the other side of 8 than he is the number 16. Some people would consider that a disappointment because they called him the golden child and they called him all of these names and the prince that did this and the prince that did that. Man, stop it. Nobody has to live up to extreme on this side or extreme on that side. Just vibe. Just vibe, baby. Watch the games. Let it play out. The moral of the story is pay attention to local experts. That's it. Pay attention to local experts. There are a lot of podcasts. I'm not the only one in Jacksonville. You've seen me have some of the guests on here, and there's some you haven't seen on here that you will, maybe. But the bottom line is I ain't going to start naming names because so many people do a good job. If I leave somebody out, I'm going to get a phone call. And then if I leave somebody out, accidentally, somebody's going to think I'm hating. So all of them. I'd rather you listen. If you don't listen to me, listen to every other Jaguars local podcast. Just stop paying so much attention to national people and letting them get under your skin. All right. Be here local tomorrow. We're going to give a wrap up of OTAs or a wrap up of minicamp off-season activities. The last practice was today. I know y'all gonna be like, man, what you gonna talk about? Half the players weren't there, the veterans weren't there. What are you gonna talk about? I'm gonna talk about the Jaguars continuing to look into the wide receiver market and how that bodes well, because even though they added 3 to that position, they are still not resting on their laurels. And that is something also that contributed to the Jaguars not going further last year, because in the offseason last year, they did think they had arrived. They are no longer thinking that way, and they're continuing to evaluate the wide receiver market is proof positive. We'll discuss that and a little bit more on Locked On Jaguars, maybe a little reference to Cooper Hodges too, who I like the way he looks and he moves around. So we'll get into that. But until then, you guys keep making us your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. We'll see you next time.